Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the National Council of Resistance of Iran U.S. Representative Office. My name is Alireza Jafarzadeh, and I'm the Deputy Director of the NCRI's Washington office. And today at this Transatlantic conference, we'll address one of the most urgent questions in international security, and that's the issue of the snapback mechanism, now, triggered on the Iranian regime. The panel will examine the continued violations of the Iranian regime nuclear commitments. They will assess the necessity of restoring these binding UN sanctions and debate the effectiveness and the consequences of such a move for global security and accountability, but also talk about the solution. For how long we're going to be dragged on this matter, and what's the real solution to end all of that. Let me remind everyone that this event is broadcast live on our website, www.ncri-us.org, and on our social media platforms such as X and YouTube. The handle is @NCRI-US. I repeat, @NCRI-US, both on Twitter and YouTube. Those journalists who have joined us on Zoom, they can pose their questions using the Q&A mechanism. Others can post their questions by sending it to media@ncrius.org. Again, media@ncrius.org. Now, today, our panel is very timely, as the three European nations, Britain, France, and Germany, just triggered the snapback mechanism to put back all prior UN Security Council resolutions on the Iran regime, started the process that will take up to 30 days. Now, before we start, we go to the panel and go to the details. Let me just mention that Mrs. Mariam Rajavi, the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, she put out a statement saying that the activation of the snapback mechanism and the enforcement of UN Security Council resolutions is actually belated, but very urgent and necessary. She basically said that the fruitless talks that just last week was between the foreign ministers of the three European countries and foreign ministers of the Iran regime, foreign minister of the Iran regime, basically, and adding to that the meeting of the deputy foreign ministers just 2 days ago in Geneva, once again proved that the undeniable truth that the mullah's regime is not prepared to abandon its project of building a nuclear bomb. And she said this makes the activation of the snapback mechanism and the enforcement of the 6 UN Security Council resolutions on the Iran regime nuclear projects all the more urgent and essential. I think it's worth recalling that over a decade ago, and in November of 2013, on the eve of the negotiations with the P5+1 in Geneva at the time, Mrs. Rajavi said, and I quote, any agreement of the international community with the clerical regime without a complete halt to enrichment, stopping the production and installation of centrifuges, the total closure of the Arak heavy water site, acceptance of additional protocol, and free access for the IAEA to all sites and regime experts who have been kept away from inspectors for years will only grant the regime more opportunities to achieve the nuclear bomb, end of quote. That was her quotation in November 2013. And then when the JCPOA 2 years later was agreed upon on July 14, 2015, she said, and I quote, if the P5+1 countries had acted firmly, the Iran regime would have had no choice but complete retreat and permanent abandonment of its nuclear weapons project, specifically giving up all enrichment and shutting down its bomb-making projects entirely. Even now, the world must firmly insist on the regime's non-interference and removal from the entire region, and this necessity must be enshrined as a fundamental principle in any agreement, end of quote. So 10 years later, the world has now come to the conclusion that at least in the first step, that they're not getting anywhere with the Ayatollahs. The negotiations are stalled because the Iran regime has been insistent on continuing its nuclear weapons program. Now, to address all of those things in a very timely manner, we have the best panel to discuss this issue with decades of experience in dealing with rogue states developing nuclear weapons. I'm just going to briefly introduce the panel members. We have Ambassador Robert Joseph, former U.S. Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security. We also have Ambassador Joseph DiTrani, who was the former senior advisor to the Director of National Intelligence, and also former special envoy for six-party talks with North Korea. Also, Dr. Oli Heinonen, former Deputy Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, who is currently a distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center. He's going to be part of the panel, but he's going to, done the interview earlier because he had to quickly leave town. We'll hear his thoughts also. And then joining us from Europe, from Germany, we have Mr. Peter Altmaier, who was the former German Minister for Economic Affairs and Energy, former head of the Chancellery and Federal Minister for Special Affairs, with a huge amount of experience in dealing with the threat of the Iranian nuclear threat, but also all other aspects of the Iran regime. So having said that, now I'm going to start with Ambassador Bob Joseph, who is a senior scholar at the National Institute for Public Policy. He actually, from 2005 through 2007, he was the Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security, and also a special envoy for non-proliferation. From 2001 through 2004, Ambassador Joseph served in the National Security Council as a special assistant to the president and senior director for proliferation strategy, counter-proliferation, and homeland defense. He's played a central role in shaping America's non-proliferation policy. Ambassador Joseph, would like to hear your thoughts.
Ali Reza, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you and the NCRI team for sponsoring what you called, very accurately, a very timely event. Let me start with 4 conclusions and then lay out what I call the strategic propositions on which these conclusions are based. Conclusion 1. I think it's very clear that the decision that's been taken by Germany, France, and the UK today to, and I quote, begin the process, unquote, of triggering the UN snapback sanctions is the right decision, and I congratulate them for doing so. It's very clear that Iran is in violation of the JCPOA. Just look at the stockpiling of 60% enriched uranium, as well as the failure of Iran to cooperate with the IAEA on both the weaponization issues as well as the suspect site issues. Moreover, I think the United States and the Europeans have made every effort to reach an agreement that effectively closes the path to a nuclear weapon, and those efforts have failed. Second conclusion, the decision today is clearly the right one. It clearly will set back, I think, the negotiations. But I don't believe it's the final story. We could see in the future, and I don't mean to be the skunk at the picnic, but we could see in the future a resumption of the E3 efforts. It reminds me of what Samuel Johnson said about second marriages. It's the triumph of hope over experience, and I wouldn't rule that out. And my point there is that if that happens, if there is an effort to resume negotiations, I would hope that the E3 would stick very strongly to the position of no enrichment. That would put it in alignment with the Trump administration, and it is the only way to ensure that Iran does not have a path to a nuclear weapon. Conclusion 3. There is a third option besides negotiation and the use of force, which is a false dichotomy that I think has influenced US policy and European policy for decades. This option is to support the Iranian people in their aspiration for a free and democratic regime, to overthrow the religious dictatorship. This is not about support through a military invasion or any boots on the ground. This is not about providing massive amounts of resources, whether it's dollars, euros, or military equipment. This is not Ukraine. What we need to do is recognize the right of the Iranian people to achieve what we achieved more than 250 years ago, and that is the right to self-determination, the right to create a government, a democratic government that represents the interests of all the people. And I would emphasize that this is a viable option. Iran is not Iraq. Iran is not Libya. Iran has been a nation state for over 5,000 years. And we see the people in Iran struggling to achieve their freedom. The fourth option is that it is a critically important time to act. The regime today is more vulnerable and more desperate than ever before. Following the attacks on its 3 nuclear sites, the regime may very well have decided already to rush to a nuclear weapon through covert means. If we don't change policy, I think there is a good chance that one day, in the not too distant future, we will wake up to the news that Iran has detonated a nuclear device amid calls from paid protesters for the death of America. There is a view that because the Iranian people did not rise up when Israel attacked, the regime is both stable and strong, that the regime is the only option that the US and others have for dealing with Iran on the nuclear question. For me, this is nothing more than the usual pundits, the usual suspects, if you will, being consistently wrong, looking for an excuse to confirm their long-standing but mistaken views. I don't know what's going to be the spark that brings down this regime. Maybe it will be someone lighting themselves off in a public square. Maybe it will be the murder of another woman in the custody of the regime. I don't know what it's going to be, but I know it's going to come. We know that the Iranian people overwhelmingly support the end of the religious dictatorship and the establishment of a democratic government. Now let me turn very briefly to the strategic propositions on which these conclusions are based. First, I think it's essential to recognize the overall threat from Iran. I think it's artificial and I think it's dangerous to separate out the nuclear threat from the threat that's represented by Iran's support for international terrorism, including murder and assassination, even in my own country. Iran's support to terrorist proxies in the region, Iran's objectives of fomenting instability in this vital area, and of course, the export of this toxic brand of extremism. We can't separate out the nuclear from these other aspects of the threat. All of these are essential aspects that the regime considers absolutely essential for its survival. And I think it's interesting to take note that when Iran did receive many billions of dollars, many billions of euros from the JCPOA relief of sanctions, what did they do with that money? They took that money and they invested it in their own nuclear program, building more and more advanced missiles, providing support to their proxies, all of the things that I have mentioned. And that is, I think, a very strong indicator of the need to continue to think about the threat as a whole and to deal with it as a whole. Second, I think it's essential to recognize the true nature of this regime, both externally in terms of its ring of fire strategy and its support for terrorist proxies, its own terrorism in the region, the various aspects that I mentioned earlier, and internally. This is a brutal, repressive regime. It's a regime that, through the act of executing tens of thousands of its own citizens, has clearly undertaken and is guilty of crimes against humanity, which the UN rapporteur has noted. This is truly an evil regime. There is evil in this world, and this is an example of that evilness. There's no chance of reform for this regime. There's no chance for change. The only thing the regime can do is double down. And you see that in its statements, official statements, that it's going to continue with enrichment. It has both the right and the intention to do so. You see that in the attempted resupply of Hezbollah, of Hamas, of the Houthis with arms. You see it in all aspects. This regime will not change. It cannot change because change would bring an end to the regime, and the regime leaders understand that. Third, it's essential to understand and to accept that negotiations have failed. They've failed for over 20 years, no matter what the form. Remember, we started with the EU3. We went to the P5+1. We went to indirect US negotiations. We went to direct US negotiations. All of these have failed. We've also tried just about every different combination of carrots and sticks, of disincentives and incentives, from appeasement under Obama and Biden to maximum pressure in the first Trump administration. That has failed as well. I think we need to recognize that the current position of the regime, they're talking about ending all cooperation with the IAEA. They're talking about, in some cases, even exiting the NPT. This is a continuation of negotiation to buy time for the nuclear program. Fourth, I think it's essential to recognize the limits on the use of force. The strikes by Israel and the United States were effective. They were effective. They have slowed the program. They have stopped the program, perhaps, for a period of time, whether that's months, whether that's years. There is still, I think, an ongoing assessment of the battle damage assessment that will tell us more about how effective they were. But I don't think anyone argues against the proposition that Iran can reconstitute, that Iran can go covert, and that they concede, that they can succeed in their effort. And fifth, and finally, I think it's essential to reject what I call this false premise, this false dichotomy, that we only have two choices between negotiation and war. There is this third choice of supporting the Iranian people, of supporting the organized opposition, of achieving or helping the people of Iran to overthrow the regime from within. And I think the NCRI plays an important role. Clearly, the 10-point plan of Mrs. Rajavi provides the vision for that outcome. an outcome that would bring a democratic, free, secular, and non-nuclear Iran. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Joseph, thank you so much. This was great. You not only laid out the problem, and you went into detail of various experience of countries who have been involved, engaged in negotiations, in talks, doing every effort to try to halt the Iran regime threat. None of that worked. And you also talked about what's the effective way, what really needs to be done. Really appreciate that. And I think you set the pace for a lot of good discussions we're going to have today and the coming days. I now want to go to our next speaker, Ambassador Joseph DiTrani. Ambassador DiTrani really he actually served as the director of the National Counterproliferation Center and as a special advisor to the Director of National Intelligence. He was also the U.S. Special Envoy for six-party talks with North Korea and has decades of experience dealing with states of proliferation concern, as I said earlier. Ambassador DiTrani, very much pleased to have you here. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Ali Riza. Thank you for the invitation. And this is an auspicious occasion where our European partners have said very clearly, enough. Iran, we saw this with the bombing in Natanz and Fordow and Isfahan. Enough. What Iran has been doing. And I've started looking at this issue very closely starting in 2003 when I took the position of the Special Envoy for negotiations, six-party negotiations with North Korea. And why? Why then? Because it was North Korea that was providing Iran with its ballistic missile support. Significant assistance that was going to Iran from North Korea. And starting to look at it, what was Iran receiving, and what was Iran receiving from Al-Kabar? And strike that. We saw Al-Kabar in Syria in 2007, and what was going on there, and that was again North Korea with Syria, but again with AQ Khan and the proliferation issue. Iran was dealing with a proliferation expert, a man who had expertise, who is providing Iran with the expertise to enrich uranium at the highest levels for nuclear weapons purposes. So I came at it from a different angle. I came at it looking at North Korea and looking at counter-proliferation and seeing Iran smack in the center of all of the above, receiving significant missile technology, training, assistance from North Korea for their missile programs, which they continue today. Ambassador Joseph alluded to this because they're moving very, very quickly in that area of a ballistic missile capability that would provide them even with, and I emphasize this, even with an intercontinental range ballistic missile capability that could touch the whole of the United States. Not only intermediate range that's touching our European allies and partners, but also intercontinental ballistic missile that could reach the United States. But also with AQ Khan and the proliferation side, why would Iran be working so closely with AQ Khan, a serial proliferator? Well, to get the expertise to do what they've been doing and that they continue to do. So starting in 2003, and indeed the intelligence community in 2007 came out with the assessment that in 2003, Iran had made the strategic decision to halt its nuclear weapons program. Now, mind you, they have all this expertise behind them. And in 2003, the assessment from the intelligence community in 2007 was they halted that program in 2003. Doesn't mean they dismantled everything. It doesn't mean they did away with all the expertise on fabricating a nuclear weapon, on weapons design, etc. Doesn't mean any of the above. It means they stopped their nuclear weapons program. And indeed, at that time, the sense was, and it should be, they stopped producing fissile material for nuclear weapons. And they weren't building more nuclear weapons. But they had all this expertise, they had all this, certainly, knowledge available, and also a great deal of material in storage. And this was in 2003. But we go up to 2015 with the JCPOA, we were seeing Iran enriching uranium, not at the 3+ level, which is for low enrichment purposes, if you will, for civilian nuclear energy purposes, but at the 20% purity level. And we were saying in 2014 and 2015, why would Iran be doing that? Well, they were doing that because they were in 2014 and certainly 2015, a threshold nuclear weapon state, where they had the ability within weeks to go from 20% purity of enrichment to 90% for weapons grade purity. That was very telling. And indeed, with what we were hearing from the IAEA, where they were not given the access, their monitors were not exposed to a number of facilities. Some of those were suspect uranium enrichment facilities, weaponization facilities. They were not given that access. That was of concern. So you could see where the Trump administration made a decision to pull out of the JCPOA, because there just wasn't enough there to indicate that Iran was serious about stopping its pursuit of nuclear weapons, of achieving a nuclear weapons capability. And we all know what that meant. And certainly we in the National Counterproliferation Center, looking at the whole of the region, looking at the global situation, not only North Korea and Northeast Asia, but the Middle East. Iran with nuclear weapons, not only a threat to the survival of Israel as a sovereign nation state, but what it would mean for other countries in the region, where they would have to build their own nuclear weapons capable, whether it's Saudi Arabia, whether it's Egypt, whether it's Turkey, etc. A nuclear arms race in the region. So Iran pursuing nuclear weapons was a very clear indicator to us at that time, and it continues to be that way in 2025. Because in 2025, we were looking at, before the bombing, if you will, of Natanz and Fordow and Isfahan, we were looking at Iran enriching uranium at the 60% purity level. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what was that? That's a clear indicator and a clear message, a message of intimidation, of saying we could quickly become a nuclear weapon state. Deal with us, lift those sanctions, let us move forward. Despite what Iran was saying in 2003, where they ceased a nuclear weapons capability, ceased pursuing that capability. So we could see why the decision taken by the United States, working very closely with Israel, to bomb Natanz, as Ambassador Joseph said, to halt their program, certainly to stop the program for a period, to halt it for a period of time, hopefully for years. But the fact of the matter is they could reconstitute that program. They have those centrifuges. Some of them more than the IR-1s. Some of them are more sophisticated centrifuges that could do a better job, quicker job of enriching uranium at the weapons grade purity level. So we see that. And also what the IAEA was telling us in 2025, they were denied access to suspect uranium enrichment facilities, suspect, if you will, nuclear facilities. Now, why would you, if you have nothing to hide? I mean, you are obligated when you sign the additional protocols, when you sign up to these inspections and you have nothing to hide, why would you deny the IAEA access? And where the IAEA came out in their report, their governance report, saying, we're not happy with Iran for denying us that access, which precipitated the bombing, the understandable and the correct decision to slow down that program, because that program was getting very close to having a nuclear weapons capability where Iran would then pull the trigger. Ambassador Joseph talked about, certainly alluded to the missile program, which they continue to move forward with in a very, very aggressive format, but also their support to their proxies, whether it's Hamas, whether it's the Houthis, Hezbollah, and the continued declaration, insistence that they have a right to enrich uranium, despite the fact all the work that's been done by the international community to say we would provide you with the low grade, if you will, the low grade purity level for civilian nuclear energy. That was always available. It's available to Iran, and they chose not to. They choose not to. So when we're talking today about snapback sanctions and the relief they got in 2015 when these sanctions were lifted, we're talking about billions of dollars. And as Ambassador Joseph said, much of that, if not most, if not some would say all, went into their nuclear program and their ballistic missile programs to deliver those nuclear weapons. And that's what we're confronted with today. And I think this is, I think the work, and I applaud what Ambassador Joseph just said. I applaud what our colleagues are doing to make the world sensitive, the global community sensitive to the danger, what we're looking at, an Iran with nuclear weapons, what that would be, a state supporter of terrorism. Iran is on that list, a state supporter of terrorism with a nuclear weapons cap. What it would mean for the survival of Israel as a nation state, what would it mean for the region, what they would do with the possibility of providing it to their proxies, whether it was radiated, enriched uranium, whether for nuclear weapons, or possibly for dirty bombs, and so forth. So I think we're at a good point right now. We're in October. A decision will be taken, and that decision, and I think the clarity that came out from our European partners today was the clarity of enforcing those sanctions, snapback, bringing them back into play, because this is where we are with Iran. And we should be resilient on this issue. We should be united on this issue. We should be very, very clear-minded on this issue. This is the correct decision. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Ditrani, for great remarks. So you looked at the whole history of the Iran regime's nuclear weapons program, but also your own experience in dealing with North Korea and how the North Koreans had actually provided significant help both on the nuclear program, but also their missile program, a necessary part of their nuclear weapons program, but also looking at the whole picture, the threat of the Iran regime. We appreciate that. Finally, we're going to welcome Mr. Peter Altmaier, the former German Minister for Economic Affairs and Energy. He has also served as the head of the Chancellery and Federal Minister for Social Affairs, as well as Federal Minister for Environment and Nature Conservation. and he was actually responsible for nuclear safety issues. So he's joining us from Germany, and we really appreciate that. And Mr. Altmaier, we'd love to hear your voice.
Thank you, Ali Reza, dear friends. Thank you for inviting me. I have, of course, to make clear at the beginning that I have served in many different functions, but I'm, of course, not the spokesman of the German government today. I'm a retired pensioner, and everything I say is not binding in any way for the new government. Nevertheless, I will not hide that I'm delighted that Europe, in a certain way, is back on the foreign affairs agenda. That was not always the case, and certainly not over the last 3 years when Europe was internally divided. And when Germany, with the former Chancellor Olaf Scholz, was not really interested in European and international cooperation and politics. This has profoundly changed. I know Mr. Merz for more than 20 years, the new Chancellor, and I know from many occasions that he has a very clear idea of the criminal regime, of the criminal nature of the Iranian regime. It's absolutely clear that he will never ever support or tolerate actions of this regime. And that's perhaps the most important thing that has changed. It was mentioned by the previous speakers several times that during the first Trump administration, when President Trump decided to pull out of the JCPOA, Europe and the US were divided. Were divided because the European countries, UK, France, and Germany, did not share the same ideas and conclusions and were not prepared to follow the step taken by President Trump. That was a critical situation because the US had imposed sanctions with a secondary nature that was affecting also companies in Europe and in Germany. And this situation did not help the people in Iran. It did nobody help really, and therefore I'm very happy that today Europe has taken the initiative to trigger the mechanism. And my impression is that the 3 countries I have mentioned, where we have a close personal cooperation between Mr. Starmer, Mr. Macron, and Mr. Merz, that is unprecedented. The last time I have seen it was between the French president, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and the British Prime Minister David Cameron. That's long ago. That's long ago, and therefore I believe this was today and yesterday a good day for the Iranian people. Of course, it is not yet the solution, and it is still a very difficult way to go. When the conflict between Israel and Iran escalated a couple of weeks ago, and we had the big rally organized in Paris, I was slightly optimistic that this could become a turning point. But then I realized a little bit later that the risk of mixing up together these 3 conflicts of Gaza and Iran in the midst of the Russian-Ukrainian war had brought us to different decisions taken in Washington, taken in other capitals. So the immediate threat of a conflict out of control in the military aspect has been avoided. And at the same time, this weak regime and the weakness was exposed for the first time when Israel were bombing the nuclear facilities and military facilities, and when the US were bombing the nuclear facilities again. That was the first time where the weakness and the isolation of the regime has been exposed to everybody who is interested in this matter. And now the second step is that the Europeans, not the Americans, the Europeans have taken the initiative to start the process to trigger the mechanisms. And I'm pretty much convinced that they are serious about it. They mean it. Of course, important talks will take place between the US and the Europeans and between Israel and the Europeans. But I believe that pressure from this side will amount. At the same time, unfortunately, I have to admit that I share totally Ambassador Robert Joseph's conclusion that this regime is unable to reform. No matter how long you negotiate, no matter what you achieve in terms of promises and announcements and declarations, the character of the regime and the oppression of its own people will never change as long as this regime exists. That is the big challenge ahead of all of us. And therefore, it's a good day, yes, I agree, but it is only a first and a small step in the fight that has still to be organized and to succeed. I share all the suggestions made this afternoon that we have to improve and to increase and to strengthen our efforts to work directly with people in Iran, to bring people in a position to defend their interests against the regimes. It has been so many times stressed how many innocent people have been killed. It has been so many times stressed that this regime cannot behave like any other democratically elected government in the world. But what we have to achieve is to unite the Western world. We are much closer in this process than we have been over the last 5 years. That's the good news. But we have also to try to organize, to unite a bit more the Iranian opposition and to make sure that
Okay, I think we just lost Mr. Altmaier. As he was making his closing remarks in the last part. But I'm sure we're going to get him back. Mr. Altmaier, we just lost you for a minute.
Yes, I realized. I don't know. I did nothing do. I don't know what happened. Perhaps it was the Iranian intelligence trying to stop me.
They don't like what you're saying about the regime and also the prospect for change.
What my basic thesis is, for the first time in more than 5 years, in 6 or 7 years, the Western world is now united, as far as I can see it, at least as regards the nuclear program. Of course, active politics for regime change are not adopted, not by the American administration, not by the British or French or German government. This is something that follows from the rules and procedures of diplomacy for many years. But, and this is an important point, nobody can hinder us and nobody can withhold us from doing more to encourage people on the ground and to encourage opposition against the regime, Iranian opposition against the regime. And therefore, we have to organize our support networks, to better organize our support networks. I had a meeting last year with the German people. I had several meetings, and I'm in close contact to many of the people of NCRI, what we can do to make sure that more politicians in Germany take an active role. I'm very much impressed, and this is my last point, when I see how big the support has grown for the Iranian opposition and the 10 points plan for President Rajavi in the American parliament, in the Senate and in the Congress. This is a big achievement, and I wish after the trilateral initiative now taken that we can achieve something similar in France, UK, and Germany as well. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Altmaier. You certainly brought both a tremendous experience of your own and your country related to the threat of the Iran regime, but also the prospect for change and the growing momentum among the Iranian people and the organized opposition to end the rule of the clerics. You highlighted the extended activities of the Iranian resistance in Europe, but also inside the country. Interestingly, just in a week, next Saturday, September 6th in Brussels, tens of thousands of Iranians will be gathering, both in support of what was just done, in support of the triggering back the sanctions on the Iran regime, but also, as all the other speakers spoke about, in support of change in Iran as the only sure way to end the threat of the Iran regime, not just for the rest of the world, but most importantly for the people of Iran. They will gather to support the 10-point platform of Mrs. Mariam Rajavi that shows what the ideas the people of Iran have and the organized opposition have for a very bright future for the people of Iran, but also its impact in the region. That's going to be Saturday, September 6th in Brussels. Now, I want to now go to Mr. Dr. Olli Heinonen. As I mentioned earlier, he was in Washington this week, but he quickly had to jump back to on the train, and that's why I had to sit down with him in our office just yesterday before he left town to ask him about his opinion on the snapback of sanctions, but also on the nature of the nuclear program of Iran. And I'd like to play a portion of that interview now. Good day, everyone. This is Alireza Jafazadeh. I'm the Deputy Director of the Washington office of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. We have today with us in our office Dr. Olli Heinonen, who was the Deputy Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. He was also the head of its Safeguards Department. He's currently a Distinguished Fellow at the Stimson Center and a top expert on the non-proliferation, particularly when it comes to Iran. I want to thank you, Dr. Olli Heinonen, for attending this interview.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate that. Dr. Heinonen, I'm going to start with a more urgent issue right now. In a few days, the clock is going to run out on the snapback mechanism. The European countries and US is also involved are trying to see if they need to trigger the snapback mechanism at the UN Security Council and put back all the sanctions on Iran. Do you think the Iranian regime meets the criteria for that snapback or not?
Well, it depends what they do in next few days, to be honest, because they can still back off from some of the activities which they have started, or back off and start to answer the questions which have been raised by the IAEA and international community. So I think next few days will be decisive to that end. But then we learn at the same time that there are also proposals to extend that snapback procedure by half a year. I understood that Russian Federation has submitted a proposal for UN Security Council. We don't know the contents of that. We don't know which kind of understandings are between Iran and other parties to that. So I would be pragmatic, and I think we need to wait for a few days to see what will be the next steps and which will be the responses of each of the parties.
Now, the Iran regime claims that they have always been compliant with both their non-proliferation treaty agreements or commitments, but also with the JCPOA. They have always been transparent, clear. They have always cooperated with the IAEA, and it's just the outside world, but also the main opposition, the Mujahideen Khalq, the MEK, who just want to, paint a bad picture of the Ayatollahs in Iran. What's your response to that?
Unfortunately, Iran has not been complying with all its obligations under the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement. That's obvious. And we have to remember the IAEA is a technical organization which is based its statements on facts, and findings are very often scientific. So when IAEA says that something doesn't match or fit with Iran's declaration, there must be a flawed explanation somewhere. There is no way that the IAEA manipulates these sort of things. And the IAEA reports are fairly open. They tell what is the problem and why they cannot conclude and what is missing. So I think that Iran has now to make a very important decision. There has been some similar decision points before. In late 2003, when Mr. Rouhani agreed with EU3 that they will tell the whole history of the nuclear program, that didn't take place. Then the other junction was in 2005, when the new sanctions were threatened and Iran was still not enriching, but decided to go and boost the uranium enrichment. And then there was another one in 2010, when the US started the negotiations, and then finally then JCPOA 2015. So such kind of important points have been there, but in big picture, Iran has not been ready to answer those questions which has been raised. And then during the years, since I added the investigations, found this evidence from Tehran, which Israel brought out. We had some of this information already in 2004 and 5, and this is the one which actually triggered visits to Parchin, for example, or Koladus, or some other military sites in Iran. So I think that now is a good time for Iran to put this part of the history behind, cooperate with the IAEA, integrate with the international community, and then start at that point of time to think also what kind of nuclear program Iran should have. I think they need nuclear energy, but what kind of energy and what kind of program which meets the needs of the Iranian people and Iranian industry, and no, not other reasons. When I look myself, just as a scientist or former scientist, there were so many tests that there must be some other place where or places. And then you look at the same time how that program developed and where these people who were more on this weaponization part went to work. So we see their reorganization, restructuring. Why to restructure? If it was terminated, the people go to university and make scientific studies. But apparently they were working with some other issues in some other places. And I think that it's important that the IAEA gets to those, gets to the bottom with the help of some member states, because it has a lot of sensitive information, and make sure that if there are any single-use capabilities which are entirely for nuclear weapon purposes, those will be dismantled. And then after the dismantlement, there will be a monitoring that those activities are not reconstituted. This is what we did in South Africa. This is what we did in Iraq. This is what we did in Libya. So this is what should be done for certain
And it was never done.
Yeah, I would like to add a little bit about the snapback. This is an important junction on this road, because now Iran has an opportunity to come clean, but at the same time, those who negotiate the snapback, they have to make a right decision and not start to implement the old JCPOA, which has flaws. That this whole system is changed to meet the requirements. If it is not done now, And if Iran decides that it's a political decision to maintain this current pattern of behavior, this will be a disservice to the whole non-proliferation regime and IAEA's work.
Very good. Thank you so much,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Renan. Appreciate it. Okay, so you heard from Dr. Oli Heinonen, with tremendous experience. He's been to Iran 25 times. He worked for the IAEA for 27 years. So, and he has dealt with the Iran regime's officials, their program, their different places. He knows what they're all about. And now I want to say a few words, especially after hearing the remarks that you all made, our distinguished speakers made. It's very clear that the regime was preparing for this day for over a year, working on multiple levels to prevent the snapback of sanctions on the Iran regime, because the consequences of the return of sanctions is actually what they wanted to avoid. It's huge, both in terms of economy, in terms of the ability to do things in the region, in terms of their missile program, their arms purchases, but also legitimacy that the regime was boasting for years that, look, you know, I'm working with all the different countries around the world, and you want to deny the legitimacy, the fake legitimacy of the Iran regime. And I think, as everyone said, this is just the first step. But really, the nuclear weapons is key to the survival of the regime and Khamenei, and that's why he has no plans to abandon his nuclear or missile program. The nuclear program of the Iran regime since day one has always been about nuclear weapons, about building the bomb. Even the regime's own officials have confessed to this goal. Let me just play a tape of an interview that former deputy speaker of the Iran regime's parliament made in 2022. His name is Ali Motahari, and he was a member of the parliament from 2008 to 2020. This interview with the state-run media is actually in Farsi, but there is an English subtitle. So let's play the tape.
فعالیت هسته‌ای شدیم واقعا هدفمون ساخت بمب بود دیگه ما تعارف که نداریم.
یعنی شما میگید هدف ساخت بمب بوده واقعا؟
100%.
هدف کی این بوده؟ یعنی
هدف
افراد خاصی یا کل نظام؟
کل نظام یا همه اونایی که این فعالیت رو شروع کردن واقعا هدف ساخت بمب بود.
می‌خواستن استفادهش کنن.
بله. نه حالا بسازیم که بترسونیم.
یعنی فقط صرفاً
بترسونیم
برای یه چیز بازدارنده.
آیه قرآن میگه ترهبون به عدو الله، برای که بترسونیم. عرض کنم که متا نتونستیم حفظش کنیم، یعنی محرمانه بودنش رو حفظ کنیم و لو رفت دیگه. حالا منافقین گزارش دادن و لو رفت.
چجوری داشتن اون گزارش‌ها رو مثلا نفوذ کردن؟
نفوذ داشتن. بله.
یا مثلا با بعضی از مسئولین در ارتباط بودن.
اینا همه جا هستن دیگه بالاخره.
ما تا حالا رسمی خیلی نشدیم کسی این صحبت‌ها رو کنه. اینایی که شما میگید تبعاتی نداره مثلا مذاکرات و اینا با عنوان بالاخره کسی که
حرف ما توجه نداره.
با خارجی بالاخره پیدا می‌کنن کاری نداره.
باشه مسئولیتی نداریم.
So, as you just heard and watched the regime's official, the goal has always been to build a bomb, and it was the main Iranian opposition movement with significant presence all across Iran, namely the MEK, which has repeatedly exposed it and prevented the regime from getting the bomb by now. As you saw, it was mentioned by Ali Motahari. Nevertheless, what the regime is trying to do is to use the so-called diplomacy as a tool to maintain the nuclear weapons program and to escape the consequences of their actions. And there is a reason for such a behavior and expectations by the regime, because over the past 3 decades, as some of the speakers also alluded to, the regime has succeeded in getting away with its non-compliance with moving the program forward, thanks to the policy of appeasement pursued by Western nations. In 2002, when we first exposed Natanz uranium enrichment facility, it actually triggered the IAEA inspections of Iranian nuclear sites. We then exposed Kala Electric and Lavizan-Shian, and revealing their work on their missile program and the delivery system. Within a year, we showed the world a complete picture of the nuclear weapons program of the Iran regime. Instead, what happened? Well, the Europeans rushed to give concessions to Tehran. They, instead of shutting down the nuclear weapons program of the regime, which was a lot more practical at the time because it was in the earlier stages, instead, they shut down our office right here in Washington. They attacked our headquarters in Europe, in France, and Tehran was really happy with the concessions, what they were getting, and they got the message from those who were giving these concessions that they can proceed, you know, unstoppable with their nuclear weapons program, with their terrorism, everything else, every threat they were making. You know, when we first exposed the underground facility near Conf, known as Fordo, in December 2005, well, instead of acting on that, more concessions were actually given to the Iranian regime. We have made over 130 cases of revelations of the Iran regime sites and projects. Now, the reason I say all of this is to really emphasize the destructiveness of the policy of appeasement, and that the Iran regime was the biggest beneficiary of that policy, and we and the Iranian people have been the main victims of that policy. But now, of course, as the speakers also highlighted, the whole situation has changed, and we need to make sure that Khamenei understand that this is a different situation. Of course, it's you know, because of the utmost weakness of the Iran regime inside Iran, that, you know, several rounds of major uprisings since 2018, engulfing all 31 provinces of the country. And because of the regime's weakness also in the region, you know, their proxies have been shattered, their biggest ally, Assad, is gone. And this is really the time to speak with a different language with the Iranian regime. Things have significantly changed inside Iran, regionally, but also internationally. You can now see some level of unity among the Western nations, and to hold the regime accountable. That's why it's so important that no concessions are made. And I agree that, you know, this is just a beginning. It's a big beginning, big step to snap back the sanctions. What are the other steps that need to be done? Nothing should be delayed. It has to continue on the path towards accountability. This is the time to close down all of the nuclear sites of Iran. As you recall, I quoted Mrs. Rajavi at the beginning of this program, dating back to 2013 and then later again in 2015. She had called for closing all of those sites. She had called for the ending of the enrichment capabilities. And that's why I think the IAEA's role should be basically to monitor and verify the closure of the nuclear sites of Iran. It's not time to go and, you know, just simply inspect the sites and take samples. That era is over, because that will get nowhere. The IAEA had a ton of evidence and information on the ground, none of which was actually responded to by the Iranian regime. Now, as far as the Iranian people are concerned, they actually welcome any steps by the Iran regime to abandon its nuclear weapons program, which so far has cost the Iranian people $2 trillion. Think about that number, $2 trillion. That's a lot of money. If you add up all of the revenue from oil, which is the the most significant revenue for Iran, since the time that the mullahs came to power, it's less than $1.5 trillion, and yet the cost of the nuclear weapons program of the regime has been $2 trillion, which is also twice as much as the cost of the 8 years of the Iran-Iraq war, the destructive Iran-Iraq war. And that's why Khamenei, despite all of that, is not backing down, because he knows that backing down on the nuclear program is actually tantamount to the start of the process of the overthrow of the regime. The regime relies on the nuclear weapons program. So that's why I think it's so important to for the world to understand where we're standing right now and deal with this situation accordingly. Now, having said that, I'd like to open the discussion to the panel before I go to the journalists who have, I'm sure they have their questions they want to pose. But I want to first ask you, all of the panel members, to just very condensedly tell us what do you think is the next step, the next tangible step right after the snapback of the sanctions. So I'm going to start with Ambassador Joseph, and then I'll go to Ambassador Tehrani and Mr. Altmaier.
Thank you very much. Let me first thank Ambassador Tehrani and Mr. Altmaier for their comments. I learned a great deal from them, as I have from yours, Ali Reza, and from that video. In fact, I'd like you to send me a link to that video, if you would, with the Iranian leader. I think it's very powerful. I have a number of comments. First, on the use of force, on the strikes against the three facilities. It was the right decision. It was a needed decision. It was brilliantly executed, and it bought us time. The key question is, what do you do with the time that was bought by those strikes on those facilities?
Yes.
If we revert to the same old failed mistakes, the same old failed policies, we're going to miss a strategic opportunity. What we need to do is fundamentally alter our approach to Iran, and I will talk about that now, because what I would like to do is sort of say, okay, well, here are the things that we should abandon, here are the things that we should do. And I think that goes directly to your question, Ali Reza. First, I think we need to reject the false belief that, as others have said, Iranian leaders will change and become more moderate. They simply won't. We need to stop throwing lifelines to this regime, making concessions that provide resources for their other nefarious activities, which we all have mentioned. And third, we need to abandon the illusion, I called it hope earlier, that after 23 years of trying, through negotiations, through economic sanctions, and most recently through limited use of force, that these can lead to an agreement to block Iran's pursuit of a nuclear weapon. They simply can't. And again, 23 years of experience. We need to chart a new course. And here I think we can take a lesson from President Reagan. President Reagan addressed in the most public way those citizens living under Soviet rule. He provided moral support to the people, just like I think we need to provide moral support to the Iranian people, recognizing their right to self-determination and to have a government that provides for their fundamental rights and freedoms. Reagan spoke unapologetically, and he spoke eloquently about the Soviet leaders' disregard for human rights, their efforts to prevent the Soviet people from hearing the truth about their own country and the world. And he engineered ways to get information denied by their own government, to get information to the Soviet citizens and about global events, and even about their own literature and their culture. I think there's a tremendous lesson that needs to be learned. We need to bring pressure on the regime through public statements that are transmitted inside Iran about the nature of the regime, its pervasive corruption, its brutal repression, its crimes against humanity. We need, of course, to tailor those messages to a specific audience. We need to support all components of the democratic opposition. I would say especially the NCRI, which is a coalition seeking the end of the religious dictatorship. And for our part, and here it's important that the E3 took this action today. We need to impose maximum pressure to further isolate and weaken the regime. We need to design and implement a comprehensive Iran policy, which has been lacking in the past, a policy that builds pressure using diplomacy, using sanctions, using other economic means, using intelligence, and using military force to deter actions by the regime. So that's a short, I think, menu of what we shouldn't do and what we should do. I did also want to very briefly comment about negotiations, because I think we've done a terrible job of negotiating over the course of these decades. Iran has played this cat and mouse game forever with us, and they have just about always won. And by winning, I mean to buy time for their nuclear program. Let me also say that Ollie, who is terrific, said that the IAEA is a technical organization, and I think it's reverted to that. It's come back to its roots. But I was basically, as Undersecretary of State, the control officer for Mohammed El-Baradei. And Mohammed El-Baradei, as director of the IAEA, was an advocate for Iranian enrichment. And he went from government to government saying that we needed to concede enrichment. And in fact, we did ultimately concede enrichment. And if we hadn't, I think we wouldn't be in the place that we're in today. And one final comment, and I really mean a final comment. Ali mentioned the IAEA role in Libya. Well, let me tell you, there wasn't much of a role for the IAEA in Libya. The United States, in secret negotiations, achieved an agreement in which we went over to Libya, we loaded up hundreds of metric tons of their equipment, and we brought it back to the United States along with their long-range missiles. When Dr. El-Baradei first went in December of 2003, after the public announcements about Libya abandoning its nuclear weapons program, he got off the airplane and he said they didn't have a nuclear weapons program because the IAEA had no clue about that. And so, yes, the IAEA is a technical organization. It plays a very important role, but we need to keep the right perspective. It's essential, but it's limited. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Joseph. Great points you raised, and I think that example of Libya and is so important, because when we talk about dismantlement of a program, that's an example, like, meaning that program should not exist on the ground there anymore. No centrifuges, no capability for enrichment, no facilities to work on weaponization. All of that need to end. That's exactly what's needed when it comes to the Iran regime. Ambassador Dichrani, your thoughts?
Just as a thank you, Ali Risa. Very briefly, look, I can't say enough about what Ambassador Joseph just said. I totally agree with him. I think his approach is right on the mark. Having studied Iran from a distance, but looking certainly at their nuclear program since indeed 2003, but even before that, we're dealing with the government there that is corrupt, a government that is not supported by its people. And understandably, why the people do not support the government. They may support elements of their policy because the Iranian people are a proud people with a rich history, civilization, culture, so proud of who they are and what they are. But the government, the corrupt government, the theocracy that's in power now is not respectful to the people. And we see it with the executions, We see with the detention. We see how they're treating people. We see it, the rampant corruption at the highest levels of government. It's very, very unfortunate for the people of Iran. So when Ambassador Joseph talks about the people, getting to the people, and mentions President Reagan, yes, President Reagan was very instrumental because he saw the need, the humanitarian need, the moral imperative to reaching out to the people, to caring about the people. And he saw that in the Soviet Union, where the leadership in the Soviet Union was the Brezhnev and others were, but certainly Gorbachev came in and cleaned that up with Glasnost and Perestroika, but he was denying, their leadership was denying information to the people about what was happening in the Soviet Union, what was happening in the world. And this is true in Iran. But fortunately, the people in Iran have access to the internet, even though the government tries to suppress it, to put a firewall up there. They do have that access. They know what's going on. And that sparks these demonstrations, these elements of, we saw this in 2009, where people are saying we're not happy with our own government. So the imperative of getting more information into Iran, focusing more on getting the truth into Iran, getting to the people of Iran, is very, very important. But indeed on the nuclear issue, and that was your question, Alireza, what will Iran do now with the snapbacks, well, and indeed, it will get them to realize that if they're really serious about their economy and their international credibility and getting the foreign direct loans and the international legitimacy, it's not only working with the axis of authoritarian states, Russia, China, and North Korea, it's working with the international community and opening Iran up so that there is more of that interflow. And then there's no more of this seeking, indeed, pursue civilian nuclear energy. Absolutely, you have that right. NPT, the nuclear weapon states have the obligation, but that's available to you with low enriched uranium at the 3% plus level, purity level. That's available. That will be made available to you so that people could benefit in the country. But getting information to the people, getting Iran to realize they cannot enrich uranium. The biggest mistake would be for us to cave. And Ambassador Joseph talked about El Baradei and how we seemingly or apparently caved on the uranium enrichment, on the enrichment issue with Iran. That would be a terrible mistake because Iran will continue, as was mentioned by this minister, they will continue to pursue a nuclear weapon. And that is not in the interest of the people of Iran, into the region, the Middle East, but into the global community's interest. This would be destabilizing. It will be a threat to the region and beyond. Thank you.
Great, Mr. Altmaier, please. You need to be you need to unmute.
Yeah, sorry. I agree with most that has been said by the other two speakers, but I would like to add one point that I forgot in my first intervention, and that is, I believe the bombings of the nuclear facilities of Iran by Israel and the US have made very clear to the public opinion globally, but also internally, domestically in Iran, that the US and Israel will never ever allow Iran to have a nuclear bomb. That's a big difference with Korea and other countries before, and it is an important message, and it is, for me, I take it as a reassurance. I think that President Trump was serious about it, is serious about it, and also the Europeans share this ambition. The second point is, as far as the next steps are concerned, we have not mentioned the the Russian war against Ukraine. President Trump is undertaking initiatives to bring it to an end. And we as Europeans are always suspicious that he would accept too many of Mr. Putin's points and would protect not enough protect the justified interest and sovereignty of Ukraine. But if we could come to a balanced peace deal that would allow Ukraine to survive and to maintain its sovereignty, that would not imply that they accept in a peace treaty to cede territory that has been Ukrainian territory for over 1,000 years to Russia, then I believe both the Americans and the Europeans would have much more margin of maneuver to take on the Iranian regime and the Iranian nuclear program. That's a very important point, and therefore I hope that this peace process with regard to Ukraine finally will succeed within the next couple of months. Third point, as far as next steps are concerned, if this snapback mechanism is not only triggered but will lead to a snapback, it will perhaps not be the end of the Iranian economy, because the American sanctions have not been the end of the Iranian economy as well. But it will be a very important message to the global public opinion and to the Iranian people that the Europeans are now united with the Americans, and that we are putting sanctions on the regime. And the fact that the regime is in power means that the economic situation of the Iranian people is ever more deteriorating. But it will not be enough. And third point, when I have said we have to support the Iranian opposition, we have to do more in our public manifestations, and I will choose two issues where my American friends will perhaps be a bit hesitant, but where the Europeans can play a major role. You know, we have all criticized the oppression of the opposition and the world record of death penalties executed in Iran. Why can we not try to build a big coalition of NGOs internationally, globally, against death penalty in Iran? That would be something that is very important. I mean, the US will be hesitant because there are some states, a lot of states, where death penalty still exists and is executed. But for the Europeans, it is clear in our Charter on Human Rights that we will never ever allow for an EU member state to sentence somebody to death, and that will make it possible to join such a campaign at a much larger scale. And the same is true for women's rights. For many, many years, there was an interpretation, at least in Germany and in France, saying that, well, the women's rights are not granted by the regime in public, but what Iranian women are doing privately, that is something that is not a matter of interest for the regime. Now we have seen the evil character of the regime as far as women and women's rights are concerned over the last 2 years. And if you look at the number of women in prison and sentenced to death, that is a terrible figure. And I think we should reach out to all female organizations of women's rights to join us in a fight for more and better women's rights in Iran. And this is a message that will be heard by the people in Iran itself, because it's about their interest. It's about their threats posed to them by the Iranian regime. And therefore, I see a lot of things we can do. And I'm much more optimistic now, where I have seen what happened over the last couple of weeks, and recently now with the triggering of the snapback mechanism.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Altmaier. I'm now going to go to our media room to see if any of the journalists would want to pose their questions or have questions that they have submitted. We have very limited time for that, but let's give it a try.
Well, thank you so much. This is NCRI-US Media Relations. We have Josh Klein of the Breitbart News would like to ask a question. Josh, I will off your microphone and let you talk to ask your question personally.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, just a quick question. So given the fact that I think the original speaker earlier mentioned that this regime really is not capable of reform. So given that the announcement of the snapback sanctions by the E3, obviously were announced today, first of all, let's just say that, those were actually to go into effect in 30 days from now. Do you think those levels of sanctions are enough in and of itself to affect Iranian behavior? And ultimately, I mean, what would be the most effective way, which is really to accomplish the goal of, ending the regime's capability to even, have this nuclear threat in general, which is the ultimate goal?
Thank you so much, Josh. This was a question by Josh Klein from Breitbart. Who would like to respond to that? Anyone? Bob Joseph, I see you.
I think Bob Joseph should respond.
Happy to do it, but the others should chime in as well. The quick answer is no. I don't think the imposition of the snapback sanctions will be sufficient to alter the behavior in the sense of making the regime make any fundamental change to its policies. Sanctions do have and can have a devastating effect on the economy. They can undercut the support for the regime, but the regime has not just tolerated, but they have a system in which, to the degree it's not North Korea, but to some degree that they can let the people pay the penalties. Again, it erodes their position, their support, their legitimacy, which is at an all-time low in any case. And I think it will help, but it won't be sufficient. I did have just one footnote to Mr. Altmaier's comment on Trump being serious and the Europeans being serious that Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. I agree. I think President Trump is 100% serious, and I think he may even be unique. But past presidents, Bush 1, Clinton, Bush 2, up until the detonation of the first device in October 2006, were also serious that North Korea would not have a nuclear weapon. And I know that there are people reportedly in the Pentagon at high levels who are saying, well, we can deter a nuclear-armed Iran, which of course misses the whole point of the matter.
But may I just add a few words about it? You are right, what you described. But there is an important small difference between the two cases. North Korea could rely on Russia and China. Iran can perhaps rely on Russia, but Russia is weak. After almost 4 years of war in Ukraine, it's a war of attrition. Ukraine is also weakened, but China, as far as I can see it, has no particular stake as far as the issue of the Iranian bomb is concerned. That's a huge difference, and that was, in my eyes, even a precondition that the Americans could bomb that facility. Israel wouldn't have mind if China would have been opposed, but for President Trump, is very cautious in his approach, and he does not want to have conflicts at several at several fronts with Russia and China and Middle East and elsewhere in the world. And therefore, my point is Iraq is much more isolated than North Korea has been a couple of years ago.
Well, certainly, Peter, I agree 100%. Iran and North Korea are not the same. The huge differences, as you point out. And I shouldn't be so pessimistic, but being as pessimistic as I am has meant that I am seldom disappointed.
Well, I want to also weigh in on this. Ambassador Tehran, did you want to say something about this question?
No. I think it's a fair question, but I do think that you have Russia and you have North Korea with significant nuclear capabilities, and we see what the Russia's doing, helping North Korea, even helping North Korea with their nuclear and missile and satellite programs, to include some other things. I could just see the same thing now that we have this axis of authoritarian states, where Iran could look to North Korea, could look to Russia, and I agree on China. I just don't think it's in China's interest to be helping Iran and to build that nuclear weapons capability. So I think there's enough there to keep Iran if the sanctions kick in, but Iran will persist, and they may try to do both. Get on the good side of the West to ensure that they get the foreign direct loans and they can move economically, but they'll continue to pursue, as they did prior to 2003. They'll pursue a clandestine nuclear weapons program. I think that's always on the table. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tehran. I want to weigh in myself on Josh Klein's question. Certainly, this is the Snapback is the first step, but this is just like opening the door to a whole new world that was not there. All these speakers talked about the policy of appeasement, talked about the need to rely on the organized opposition. They talked about the change of the regime as the only solution to end the nuclear threat of Iran, because moderation, change of behavior will never happen. Well, let's talk about the capabilities of this movement for change. This is not just an idea or the desire of a nation for freedom. Rather, this is a very powerful, potent, capable movement for change that was totally overshadowed or pushed aside as a result of the policy of appeasement for decades. And now is the opportunity to look at the capabilities of this movement. Look, we're talking about the nuclear weapons program of the Iranian regime, but the biggest factor that has prevented the regime from getting the bomb, according to their own confessions by the regime, is actually the Iranian resistance that exposed the nuclear sites in various places, dating back to even 1991, when we had information that the regime had purchased nuclear warheads from the former Soviet Republic of Kazakhstan, and we made it public in the Washington Post and other places, and that was halted. And then the Natanz nuclear enrichment that triggered the IAEA inspections, and a whole host of others. I don't want to go through that, but that tells you about the capability of the movement on the ground because of their presence on the ground. You talk about the missile program, another necessary component of building the bomb. Again, it was the Iranian resistance, this movement, that exposed the details of the missile program. At least 42 sites all over the country involved in both building the missile program, but also launching them. Their drone program. We were first in Washington to expose that drone program, getting the attention of Congress, and eventually they introduced language legislation. No one was talking about the drone program of Iran and what the IRGC was doing, way back in 2020 when we first exposed the details. Talking about the terrorism of the Iran regime that everyone has been talking about today. Well, this movement has been the main victim of their terrorism, but also the biggest exposure of their terror network in the region, in Europe and other places. Some of the most spectacular, strange way the regime got involved in terrorism by getting their own diplomat, bringing a bomb from Iran in a diplomatic pouch on a commercial plane, was in 2018. Their diplomat was arrested, convicted of terrorism, sentenced to 20 years of imprisonment. Who was the target? Mrs. Mariam Rajavi and the rally that she had organized, the NCRI in Paris. Talking about human rights that all of you alluded to. Well, this movement has been the main victim of the human rights violations of the Iran regime. The massacre in 1988, as many as 30,000 political prisoners were executed. The vast majority of them belonged to the MEK movement inside Iran. Why? Because this was a movement that was undermining the Islamic extremist ideology of the mullahs, but had the capability to move the society forward to freedom. Talking about the protests inside Iran, that, you know, those things don't just happen overnight. There's a history, there's a culture built by the movement for change in Iran. Right now, as we speak, there are resistance units of the MEK who are active on the ground. Last year, they had over 3,000 operations against the IRGC. That's the main concern of the Iran regime, that they constantly talk about it. In terms of the future, this is the movement that many years ago, not just recently, dating back to starting about 30 years ago, building the foundations for the kind of a platform for future of Iran that separates religion and state, considers ballot box as the only criteria for legitimacy, not inheritance of authority or theocracy. And the role of women has been central in this movement. The vast majority of the leaders of the movement are women. It's led by a woman, Mrs. Mariam Rajavi. The whole host of other details in that platform that has gotten the support of some 4,000 parliamentarians around the world. But all of these capabilities was always overshadowed by the Iranian regime just trying to cut a deal with other countries, telling them, okay, if you give me that, this and that, I'll act. And always one of the main demands of the Iran regime from their counterparts was to either dismiss this movement, to designate them as terrorists, to limit their activities, to limit their operations. That's how we got designated here in Europe and other places. So that's why I think it's so important, as all of the speakers pretty much alluded to, that this is just the beginning. This is the time to look at the whole new reality of Iran, which is the capability and the intention of the people of Iran to end the rule of the clerics. Just think about a free Iran, a democratic Iran, a non-nuclear republic Iran. What a difference it will make, not just for the people of Iran, but for the whole region, and also for the proliferation of the nuclear weapons by the Iranian regime. With that, I'm sure, you know, there is a lot more that can be said, but we have just passed a little bit over our time. I want to really thank all of the members of our panel, contributed significantly to the understanding of this issue, and what a timely conference, just minutes after the snapback was triggered. We're now sitting here discussing this issue. I want to thank Ambassador Bob Joseph. I want to thank Ambassador Joseph Dietrani, Mr. Altmaier, and Mr. Oli Heiner. I want to thank all of our viewers. There are tens of thousands of viewers I can see on our social media platforms who've been watching this, and I'm sure this is not going to be the end of this issue. It just started to a whole host of other discussions related to Iran and the future of Iran, the role a free Iran can play in the peace in the whole region and around the world. Thank you so much again. I want to thank all of our viewers. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.